verses 15 through 21. I've got it written for you in your bulletin there. John 6, 15 through 21. I'll read that now. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water. They were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were headed. And one time, the great American humorist Mark Twain was on vacation in Holy Land with his wife, and they were staying in Tiberias on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And the night he was there was one of those perfect nights. You know, there was a full moon shining on the water, and the water was just calm and clear. The weather was perfect. I mean, you couldn't have pictured a better romantic setting. So Twain said, you know, I'm going to take my wife out on the lake. I'm going to get a boat and go out there and just enjoy this setting and enjoy each other's company. So they walked down the pier by the motel, and Twain asked a man who was sitting in a rowboat there how much he would charge to take them out on the water for a little while. Well, you've seen pictures of Mark Twain. He always wore that white suit, you know, the white shoes and the white Texas hat. And the oarsman looked at him for a moment and must have decided he was a rich American rancher. And he said, well, I guess about $25. And that was an awful lot of money back in those days. And so Twain thanked him, and as he turned away with his wife on his arms, he says, now I know why Jesus had to walk across. So, this morning, we're continuing our sermon series on the miracles of Jesus as recorded in the book of John. If you remember, John records for us 7 miracles in his gospel account. We've already looked at 4 of them. And this morning we're looking at number 5, Jesus walking on the water. And I really want you to remember, these miracles were done for a reason. And John makes that very clear in his account of everything Jesus did had a purpose. It had a meaning. Even his miracles. And John says these were signs given to us by Jesus. The miracles were given as a sign to the people of who Jesus was. They proclaimed to the Jews there that he was the Messiah, the very Son of God, God himself in the flesh. And they were a sign to the people that pointed to the reason why Jesus had come. Yeah, that was vastly different from what the Jews had envisioned for the Messiah. You know, as we read in verse 15, the Jews were looking for a Messiah who would be an earthly king, a Messiah who would restore David's kingdom on earth and, you know, defeat the Romans and kick them out of Israel and cleanse the Holy Land and restore the Jews back to prominence. But as we know, that's not the reason Jesus came at this time. That's not the reason God sent him. This king came to die. He came to offer himself as the final atoning sacrifice for the sins of the world, to reconcile us to the Father and to give us eternal life through faith in him. And that's what his ministry demonstrated to the people. That's what these miracles show. That was the sign to the people. So that's why every miracle, every sign given to us by Jesus is different. You never see them repeated. There are different miracles, different settings, different events, different purposes, even different audiences. Think about this. First miracle, the turning of the water to wine, that was really a sign that was given to Jesus' followers. To that handful of fishermen who followed him when he told them, come by the Sea of Galilee. And if you think about it, you know, Peter and James and John and Andrew, the others that were there, it wasn't the full 12, it was just that handful there. They didn't know who Jesus was. They knew he was a rabbi. They sensed there was something different about him. Some of them thought, well, he might be the Messiah, but they didn't know. Their faith and their trust was really in a fledgling stage. And they just were following him like they followed John the Baptist. So Jesus gave them a sign. He used the opportunity opportunity of the wine running out at an ordinary wedding to point to himself as the Messiah, came to purify the world through his own blood. And we see this in the miracle of turning water to wine when he converts those water jars from their intended use for purifying vessels, and he makes them as holders for wine. And so that represents for us his blood in the new covenant. So that was an important sign, but it wasn't given to everybody at the wedding. It was only given to a handful of followers to help them know who it was they were following. The sign of the healing of the official son was given to a handful of people. Not everybody saw that happen. It was just Jesus' disciples, the official, and his household. And it was intended for a purpose. The purpose was to grow the faith of the official and to confirm to the disciples that Jesus was empowered by God to fulfill the prophecies. You know, Isaiah said that the Messiah would heal the sick and the lame and the blind. And it pointed to the spiritual healing that Jesus would do on the cross. This miracle resulted in the first evangelistic movement in Capernaum. As the official saw his son healed, he told the story, and the household and others there started to put their faith in Jesus. The healing of the man by the pool. That was a sign ultimately given to more people. So as Jesus does these miracles, the audiences are getting larger. It was Jesus' announcement that the Messiah had arrived. And you know, when we talked about that miracle, I didn't go into great depth about the importance of the pool of Siloam. During the Feast of the Tabernacles, the priest would lead a procession from the temple, and they would follow this stream through the walls of the city and eventually come to the pool of Siloam, where the stream ended up. And men holding shofars, you know, their trumpets, they would be blowing the trumpets, and everybody would be shouting, Hosanna, Hosanna. Sound familiar? They'd be waving palm branches. And the priest would come to the pool, and he would kneel down and draw about 2 quarts of water from the pool. And the next morning, everybody would gather at the temple to celebrate it, and they would offer that water at the temple. This was a special offering at the Feast of Tabernacles. And as they offered that water, they would read and sing from the Psalms. They were messianic psalms, and the people would cry out for redemption and healing and salvation from the Messiah. So through this miracle, which was the paralytic man healed at the pool of Siloam, Jesus was proclaiming to that he was the Messiah to the disciples, to the man who was healed, and that message went straight to the Pharisees who saw the man walking with his mat. So the word was getting out. In the feeding of the 5,000 we just looked at last week, Jesus was carrying his message to a lot of people now. The miracle proclaimed God as a God who provides. He was the same. The Messiah was the very same God who provided manna in the wilderness. So every time an audience witnesses this, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. But in the miracle today, Jesus walking on the water, something changes. The message isn't for everybody. The message isn't for the nation of Israel or the Pharisees or anybody else. It's just for the chosen 12. This was a miracle given just for them and nobody else. And as we see, Jesus wanted to demonstrate to them that they could rely on him even if they couldn't see him. You know, just because we can't see Jesus or his Spirit doesn't mean he's not there. So with that long introduction and summary, let's dig into this passage. See what we can get out of this familiar story of Jesus walking on the water. Look back at verse 15. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Okay, so verse 15 comes at the end of the story of Jesus' miracle of feeding the 5,000. As we just talked about, people didn't understand the role of the Messiah. They were looking for an earthly king, and when Jesus fed them, did that miracle of multiplying the 5 loaves and fed all these people, they decided he's going to be our king. He is the Messiah. We're going to make him king by force. We don't care if he wants to or not. He's going to be king, and we're going to attack the Romans. Yeah, that's a problem we sometimes have. We want to force God to do our will rather than ask that His will be done. These people came up with an idea. They said Jesus needs to be king, and they told God to bless their idea, and they're going to make it happen whether God wanted it or not. And Jesus knew their intent. He knew they misunderstood. He knew that even the disciples had gotten caught up in that moment and had misunderstood why He came. And like we see so many times Jesus went away. He withdrew from the crowd. He went up on a mountaintop by Himself. Matthew says Jesus specifically went to the mountain to pray, spend time alone with the Father. Probably to pray about what was happening. Because if the people tried to force Him to be king and revolt against the Romans, it would not fulfill the prophecies that were given. Verse 16. When evening came, His disciples went down to the lake. When they got into a boat, they set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. Now, apparently, Jesus had told His disciples going across the lake to Capernaum by themselves. It's the only reason they would have gotten in the boat and left Him there. He'd gone up on the mountain. He said, you go into Capernaum, I'll meet you there. So they got in a boat. They set off across the lake late that evening. Now, it's dark. And when it's dark in these days, it's dark. The only light they had would have been the lanterns that would have hung on the bow and on the back of the boat. They only had that. As they're rowing across the lake, a strong wind starts to buffet that boat. We need to understand that wind was not just happenstance. This is not a normal event. That wind symbolizes the storms that come into the lives of people who follow Jesus. That's something that happens to those who follow Jesus. If you look at Scripture, if you read the biographies of early church fathers or the biographies of religious leaders of the past, or just look at your own lives, you'll quickly realize that storms come whenever you've had a significant spiritual event. And that is Satan attacking us to keep us from moving forward in our Christian life. I mean, look at what just happened here. Look at the whole story. The disciples had seen Jesus do miracles, right? We've already been over 4 of them. But those were limited in size and scope. The healing of individuals, the changing of water to wine in a handful of jars at a wedding. They'd never seen or experienced anything like what just happened. They just saw Jesus take 5 loaves of bread and feed 5,000 men, not counting women and children. Some commentators said it could have been as many as 15,000 people there. And Jesus fed them all that day. And the disciples watched this happen. They participated in this. And you know they were awestruck. This was a significant spiritual moment. This was a mountaintop experience for them. And this was life-changing. And immediately after that event's over, they all get in a boat together. You know what they're talking about. And then all of a sudden this wind comes up. And it blows against them. Jesus told them to go to Capernaum, and the wind is blowing them away from Capernaum. Trying to keep them from going where Jesus was sending them. Does that sound familiar? Satan is going to keep you from experiencing spiritual mountaintops if he can. That's why storms and trouble and tribulations come right before spiritual events in your life. That's why sometimes, right before something happens, Satan's going to try to stop you from doing it. And you'll come up with excuse after excuse about why you can't go. And you'll start thinking to yourself, I'm really busy. I'm just not real sure about this. I remember when I took Pat to Emmaus. I had Pat in the car. I picked him up. He argued the whole way from y'all's house all the way in there. Mule Day's this Saturday. I really don't want to miss. I need to go to Mule Day. So they have that every year. Yeah, but it's going to be a good year. I think you'll be all right. I think you need to go to Emmaus. I wouldn't let him. I had him in the car. I wouldn't let him out. And what happened? Emmaus ended up changing his life. Satan's going to do what he can to keep you from experiencing the move of God. But failing that, He will attack with fury after you have that mountaintop experience. He's going to keep you from moving and growing and doing what God wants you to do. I have seen that time and time again in the Emmaus movement. I have seen men and women, young and old, they leave that weekend mountaintop experience. They are on fire with God. Sunday afternoon, they are just on fire. They're going to go back to their lives. They're going to change this world. They're going to make a difference. And the wind starts blowing. And immediately storms come in their life. And troubles come in. And it derails them. And it makes them forget everything they have experienced. I've seen that in my own life. I go to some of my Promise Keepers, spiritual conference, retreat. Anything where I've experienced a closeness with God, I get attacked immediately. And it seems like something's wrong. It can get overwhelming. And just like these disciples, you row, and you're just not making any progress. You're stuck. That's what's going on here. The question is, what do we do about it? What can we do about it? Verse 19. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water. And they were terrified. But then he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were headed. So they're in the middle of that storm. It's dark out there. And they're rowing, and that wind's getting stronger and stronger. They're not making any progress. And these fishermen in the first century AD, who were probably very superstitious anyway, they'd look up, and there's a figure walking across the water. Mark records that Jesus actually wasn't going to stop at the boat. He was walking past the boat, but the disciples saw him and called out to him in fear. They thought he was a ghost. And here's where the lesson was given to the disciples and to us. Here's where the sign comes in. What do you do when you're in the midst of that storm? When darkness surrounds you, you're buffeted by winds, you just can't get your head above the water. What should we do? Well, we should call out to Jesus for help. And the disciples did not do that in this storm. There's another storm that's recorded in the Gospels. You know, a major storm's going on. Jesus is sleeping in the boat, and the disciples are scared. And this time, they learn. It's later on in the ministry of Jesus. Jesus sleep. They cry out to Jesus, "Help us, save us." They learn their lesson. But here, remember, this is early. They're not real sure what's going on with this Jesus, and they don't call out for help. And then when they see him walking by, they get scared and they're terrified. So Jesus calls out to them and reassures them. "It's me. It's okay. Don't be afraid." So we should call out for help. But they didn't do that. They failed because they weren't looking to Jesus for help. They were trying to do things on their own. They're trying to make it through the storm on their own. That's not what Jesus intended. And there's going to be a time coming, not far away, Jesus is going to be leaving this handful of disciples alone. They're not going to have him. They're not going to have his physical presence with them. They're not going to be able to wake him up in the bow of the boat and say, "Hey, we're about to die here, help." But they're going to have to learn to trust in him and believe in him and call out to him for help, even though they can't see him. Jesus knew they were in that storm. He knew they needed help. He was going to walk past. He was waiting to see if they would trust him, even if they couldn't see him. They failed this test. Neither John or Mark doesn't include in their accounts the story of Peter walking on the water. Not sure why, but if you remember, it's the same story. But remember what Jesus told Peter when he got out there and he started sinking the waves? It applies here. "O ye of little faith, why did you doubt? Why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you call out to me?" That was the problem with the disciples here. Despite seeing Jesus do great things like feeding the 5,000, seeing how he could heal the official's son from a distance without being physically present, their faith wasn't strong enough yet to believe in the midst of darkness, buffeted by the winds that night. When they finally realized that Jesus was near, and they realized that he had power over nature, that he was walking on the water, that he was the creator God who had power to bend everything to his will. When he said, "It's me, don't be afraid," it says they were finally willing to take him into the boat. And notice the end of verse 21. Immediately, the boat reached the shore where they were headed. They had rowed and rowed and rowed, and they hadn't made it there, and Capernaum's not getting any closer. And then when they took Jesus in, when they had Jesus with them, immediately they were at the shore. The only way we can do what Jesus wants us to do is trust him and call on him in the storms. Keep our eyes of faith on him, even when we can't see him. Call out to him with our hearts of faith, even though he's not physically present. Jesus showed in this miracle he's always near, always willing to help, if we will but call out to him. He showed his power by walking across the water that night. He had power that was greater than anything they've seen, over physical, over spiritual. He demonstrated he controls all things. And we need to be looking to him for help. Jesus wants you to believe he's near. Even if you don't see him, he wants you to trust that he's with you. Even in the darkness. Even in the storms. So remember that when we experience God's move in our lives, Satan's going to come against us. But like the song that's out playing right now, we need to look at Satan and say, "Not today, Satan. Jesus, help me." Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for your word, and we thank you, Lord, for your example. That you cared enough about that handful of disciples in the boat to do a miracle just for them. That in the midst of a storm that was keeping them from being and doing what you wanted them to do, that you walked past, and that you brought healing, and that you brought them safely to your will. Lord, help us when we experience these same storms. When we go through this life and the winds are buffeting us, to turn to you immediately. To know we don't have to do this on our own. We can't do this on our own, but we need you. Give us the grace to turn to you and trust in you in all ways. For it's in Jesus' holy, mighty name we pray.